Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, the US government is advised once again by its International Religious Freedom Commission to designate India as a country of concern after its terrible mistreatment of its Sikh community, amongst others. We take a look at the story of a great Canadian Sikh politician, Senator Singh Dhillon, and his enormous contribution to Canadian society. Meanwhile, Sikh Heritage Month gathers pace in British Columbia. And talking of successful integration and contribution to society, here in the UK, a British Punjabi football team celebrates its 60th anniversary. Its survival and continued success attributed primarily down to the fundamental characteristics of its Sikh community members. All this and more on today's show. But joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend, and of course, we spent a part of it checking out your comments. We love them, so keep them coming. Other than that, back to you over in London, Angus.
Indeed. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, at the end of the show, we will be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling below the video. So thank you for those. Right, James, let's get underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
It, of course, as we touched on Friday, is the opening ceremony on Saturday of the National Sikh Heritage Month in Canada, and particularly the BC events, and it's actually broken up throughout different provinces the way that it's celebrated. So we're going to be taking a look, of course, being in Surrey, British Columbia myself here, we're going to take a look at events from the Sikh Heritage Month BC and the opening ceremony that I was fortunate enough to attend over the weekend. And we'll take a look at some of the details, and both of my stories tonight actually kind of come together in that theme. So again, it is a great celebration of all of the Sikh heritage within British Columbia and the contributions to our great nation here in Canada. So, of course, here we see a group of politicians who actually, being the seventh year that they have done this, they gave a proclamation acknowledging the Sikh Heritage Month and the society. So that is our provincial, a lot of the provincial MLAs from the Surrey and surrounding area presenting the society with that plaque, and great honor for them because they've worked at it for many years. But again, this is the 7th annual event, and it takes a lot of work by a lot of volunteers, so it was nice to see them being recognized for that. Now, the whole idea of Sikh Heritage Month in Canada, and particularly British Columbia, is recognizing the amazing contributions going back over 100 years. The Sikhs came to Canada, and they were actually a part of various visits prior to the immigration starting, and that was to do with them being on the British military, escorting the Queen Victoria on her official Jubilee visit here in Canada and British Columbia, and then again before they started to make the way to find work in the mills here. And then we also know that there were times where, in particular, the Komagata Meru was a ship that was turned away, and it had over 300 Sikhs on board, and they were coming to find a better life, but were turned around and sent back. So again, there's also been a lot of tumultuous times, a lot of challenges, and a lot of struggle within that Sikh community, but also within racism and mistreatment over the many decades as well, Angus. When we look here, we can see that the Sikh Heritage Month actually has a lot of great events that are not only focused on the Sikh community, but to invite the overall community together to take part in these events. And they take place in Victoria, in Vancouver, in Abbotsford. I'll be out there later this week to tour one of the oldest, still standing Gurdwara in Abbotsford, British Columbia. So I will be taking a camera along, Angus, so you can get a view and our viewers can see this and understand the historical significance of that Gurdwara. Now, here's a few key milestones in the Sikh history of British Columbia. And of course, it has gone back way before, way more enhanced. But again, we only have an hour's show, so I can't spend it all talking about the many, many ways that they've contributed. But in 1897, again, when they visited for Queen Victoria's Jubilee, and that was the Diamond Jubilee, so the Sikh Lancers visited with her, and that was a great moment to really open them up to the possibilities of Canada. In 1902, the second contingent of Punjabi soldiers arrived, intrigued by BC's prospects. And then the first wave of the Sikh immigrants arrived. According to the census in 1904, 258 Sikhs arrived at that time. In 1908, the first Gurdwara was built in Vancouver, and that's, of course, a cultural hub for the community, and not just for the Sikh community, but for the entire community. Now, that Gurdwara is no longer standing. However, the one that was built in 1911 in Abbotsford, again, is now still standing, and that I will tour later this week and bring video and images so you can enjoy that as well. So once again, there are the year of 1947, ironically the same year as partition, but that was the first year that Sikhs were granted the opportunity to vote and to actually become Canadian citizens. And in 1950, Mr. Singh Grewal elected to the Mission City Council, and that was the first Sikh who was elected to office. And he went on to actually become mayor, and that was a big deal, as Mission is just outside of the city of Vancouver in the Fraser Valley. So it is a larger population, or a larger populated community. So it was seen as a significant moment in time for Canadian officials. So that was great. And then, of course, in 2017 was the first time that they proclaimed Sikh Heritage Month in British Columbia. And Canada-wide was one of the first nations around the globe to recognize Sikh Heritage Month. So that's really exciting. And there were many events, Angus, that happened throughout the weekend. And I just wanted to share one quick snippet that is a bit of an introduction to one of the events coming up this week with a poetry reading and spoken word performance. And this young lady had written a poem the morning of this event that she shared with the crowd. And I thought that I would share it with everybody else, because I just thought that it was very touching and very appropriate for the day that we're living in. So I will just bring that up, and everybody can enjoy that as well. Where did my screen go? There it is.
It usually begins with origins. If you were to ask me where and when this light began, I can only tell you what my Guru Sahib taught me. The reality is, this light has been here forever. Ad Sach, Jagad Sach, Hai Be Sach, Nanak Hosi Be Sach. Since before time, throughout all the ages of time, in this very moment of time, and forever beyond time, this light is true. This light that is the ingredient of our souls, that is rooted in the divine, it lives in Anand. If my soul is meant to be experiencing Anand all the time, then why am I not living in bliss all the time? What happened to our souls, to that light? If we started from that place of Anand, from being one with the one, then what happened along the way? And how do we get back to that place of connection, of oneness, of Anand? What's stopping me? What's stopping you? I hope you come join us next week to continue this story and explore this journey of life we're all on together. Thank you.
So as you can see, Angus, when you watch that video, it's short and sweet, but she is a young poet and actress from the Surrey community. Her name, I'm just going to read it just so I don't mess it up, Japneem Kaur, and she is going to be performing at one of our local theaters this week, and it's called Soul's Journey Home. And yeah, if anybody's out by the Anvil Theatre or in Metro Vancouver, I encourage you to go out and support this young lady. She very well spoken, very beautifully presented. In terms of the poetry and the spoken word. So she really has a lot, I think, to share that resonates with not only Sikh values, but also values that everyone can find interesting and helpful, Angus.
Indeed, and yeah, I mean, I've seen so many women from the Sikh community stand up in front of large audiences and deliver, whether it's a speech, whether it's an impassioned plea or whatever, and it always strikes me the sheer confidence and just the self-assuredness of these ladies when they stand up, and that lady is a prime example of that. And I think I genuinely think it's just down to the passion that is stemmed from their Sikh faith. It just gives them that confidence to stand up and speak so powerfully, and there's another prime example. But yeah, I think Sikh History Month, we talked about this last week, and it always fascinates me, things like this, because there is such a rich heritage, and actually, ironically, a really rich shared heritage between the British and the Sikh community, because of course we had the Sikh Empire, which then finally relinquished itself to the British Empire, but even as a result of that, a lot of good came out of that. Yes, there was some bad, but there's a lot of good came out of that, and that was a really interesting integration between the Sikh community and the British community, which was seen all over the British Empire. And here in Canada, that's another prime example where, of course, Canada, part of the British Empire at that time, the Sikhs were allowed to move across to Canada. There was essentially at least a form of an open door for them to leave India and build new lives in places like Canada and other parts of the British Empire. And that's, as I say, that shared heritage. I think the British Empire as it was, but has now obviously evolved just into simple British community, the British society, has been so much enriched by the Sikh community. And I think of any community that I can think of that we absorbed as part of the British Empire, to me, the Sikh community has actually contributed probably the most to British society in terms of everything they've brought. And it's all been positive. You know, it's been such a massive contribution. So when we look through that, even that brief summary that you put up there, James, of some of the key events, I mean, one can only picture, I mean, you put down whatever year it was at the turn of the last century, the Sikh Lancers arriving in Canada. Can you imagine what a magnificent spectacle that must have been? A regiment of Sikh Lancers. I mean, it's Lancers in any nation are always resplendent, but you imagine the Sikh Lancers with their fantastic Sikh outfits. They would have looked fantastic. I wonder if there are any pictures. There must be some pictures that exist of that. We'll have to try and do a bit of digging, see if we can find some diggings. Because I only need to look back, and one of my favourite pictures that we've shown up, James, was that knee hang from just around about the Sikh Empire days, or just after the Sikh Empire days. And again, these guys look so magnificent. They just, even just a simple picture portrays 1,000 words, and it portrays how rich and wonderful the heritage is. So it's great to see. And then, of course, one of the other main areas of conversation around this is how the Sikh diaspora, when they arrived in places like Canada, it didn't take them very long to not just to integrate, but to build enormously powerful their own communities and hugely successful communities. And again, another thing I picked out about those milestones, it took them, just over 47 years to get the vote after arrival. I mean, again, in the context of Canada at the time, which was obviously very white, and it was very British Empire, and of course very discriminatory, and it's easy again to condemn it through the lens of time. But back then it was normal. It was very normal to be discriminatory against ethnic minorities. That's just how it was. But it took them 47 years to finally get the vote in Canada, which they did. But then only 3 years later, the first Sikh get elected to mayor. Again, that's how contributory and how powerful the Sikh community can be, given half the chance. They had the mayor within 3 years of the community just getting the vote. So again, it just shows, it's just these little smidgens of evidence that tell a massive story of how the Sikhs have succeeded in places like Canada. But of course, that's reflected right across the world, wherever the diaspora found around itself. So, yeah, I would say to the Sikh community in Canada, I mean, like every community, well done. I mean, what a fantastic heritage. Get out there, celebrate it, go educate other people about it, because I'm educated, even just seeing some of those basic milestones, how much, you can pick from that and learn about, what the Sikhs have done in places like Canada, James. So, yeah, fantastic to see that, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And one of the other big parts of yesterday was that they actually presented 5 different youth from the local area, not just Sikh youth, but other youth as well, with scholarships. And then they also handed out the Community Changemakers Awards. And one of those in attendance to receive an award was actually our newest senator, Baljit Singh Dhillon. And we've spoken of this when he was appointed to the Senate in Canada. And it really showed that there was a breaking of barriers. But this individual has really inspired so many others of all different backgrounds. And that especially comes true when it comes to the minorities. Now, the reason that I bring this up, Angus, is that he was a 35-year member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In that career, he became the very first Sikh to wear a turban on patrol. And that was a big thing. It took him fighting and really advocating to make that happen. And once it did, he was able to join the RCMP and change their policy when it came to turbans and facial hair. And that may not seem like a big deal to many, but when you look at the storied history of the RCMP, that was a big challenge. That was a big deal. And that happened around 1990 when it finally happened. So it really wasn't that long ago. And I personally remember this. And there was a big debate across Canada about this issue. But again, it just came to be that it was the right thing to do. And the fact that there had been concessions made in the past when it came to military service members. So it only made sense that our National Police Force had the same type of exceptions made. Now, Mr. Dhillon was actually born in Malaysia in 1966. At the age of 16, he moved to Canada, and that was after his father's passing. In order to help to support his family, he actually was a berry picker and fruit picker, and really just showed that it didn't matter what the work was, that he was dedicated to making life better and to contributing to his family and community. And as I said, he had that challenge of joining the RCMP, but it was something that was special to him, that he really wanted to achieve and made it happen. He didn't back down. He was very, very determined to make it happen and made it so. Now, Mr. Dhillon also contributes a great deal to not only youth groups and the leadership of tomorrow, but also with the LGBTQ community. His daughter actually has come out as gay or lesbian, and he is very proud of her, as he should be, as a father, to stand by her and to stand by to advocate on behalf of the entire community. So it shows that his real faith and his true belief that there needs to be equality for all comes through and really shines in that perspective. Now, he was, as I said, appointed to the Canadian Senate. Again, the first time a Sikh has been appointed to the Senate. So Mr. Dhillon is all about breaking barriers. He is all about setting an example for future individuals, no matter what faith, religion, or ethnic background. And on the screen, you can see an image of him in his turban with the RCMP uniform. Looks great. Looks very proud to be there. And I know that Canadians are very proud of the work that he has done. He has actually served in many different roles in the RCMP. He wasn't just an officer and stayed that patrol officer. Instead, he's actually been involved in the Air India investigation. He has been involved in what we know as the Robert Picton pig farm case of a mass murderer. He has been a police interrogator. He's done emergency planning. He has been involved in very high-level gang enforcement and intervention programs. programs and investigations. So he has really, really contributed in so many powerful ways to Canadian culture, to the safety and security of British Columbia, and now he continues that role of service. And we'll finish with a quick video, this segment. We'll finish with a quick video of Senator Dillon as he spoke to the crowd after being presented with one of his, with the Changemaker Award. This is in a long list of awards, most notably or most recently, the King's Coronation Award for Service to Community. So he has just a long list and litany of awards that he has received, and deservedly so. And we will take a look at his little speech after he received that award that I thought was very powerful for everyone.
Step into this life, those who give of themselves into this service, you have my absolute respect, and I will ask all of you that are here, when you see someone who says, I'm a politician, remember, they are giving so much of themselves and of their family and of their experience and of their work to serve. So, regardless of party, regardless of the three-letter words that we sometimes use to define ourselves, and the colors that we put up on flags, whether it's this party or that party, this is the moment that we come together in all parties to face the challenge in front of us. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So there you go, Angus. As you can see, very humble, very well spoken, very articulate, but just a very personable gentleman. After the awards, after the ceremonies and the grand opening, he spent a lot of time talking with the community, shaking hands and listening to their concerns as a senator, but also just communicating with them about his history and the challenges he's overcome. So what an incredible, incredible Canadian.
Yeah, and when I see people like him, you really do have to take your hat off to the challenges that he must have faced in his career. Of course, there is a natural discrimination in a lot of Western society, and he's broken through all those ceilings himself individually. He has been such a pioneer, as indeed many have been like him from the community, to break through those barriers, break through the discrimination, and achieve enormous levels of success, like he's done. And of course he is very visible, and I think what's the message that is so powerful that he carries as that pioneer, of course he's wearing a turban, he's got the beard, it's very visible. It's actually sending such a basic, simple message to anybody in the Sikh community, particularly amongst the young. Look what I've done. I've been able to do this, so therefore you have the ability to do this. It's as an example. It's fantastic, certainly within the community, but also to the wider community, to the whole community. It says, look, I am a Sikh. I am very visible. Look at my beard. Look at my turban. This is who I am. And it means people think, oh, he's different. Okay, and they start asking the questions. And again, when I often talk about getting the khalistan flag out, or just getting out there in the streets, campaigning, be active, it provokes people to ask questions. Okay, who are you? What are you about? What is this all about? And it's all about spreading information. I'll talk about this actually in one of my stories about getting out into the community, because people naturally are reserved. People are naturally discriminatory. It's just human nature. We all tend to sort of stick amongst our own kind until we get to know another person from another community, and we actually find they're okay. There's always when those barriers break down, we find they're not a threat. They're nothing dangerous or threatening to our little group, and therefore those friendship bonds are formed, and certainly the supporting bonds are formed. And that's what this is all about. It's breaking down those barriers. It's making the Sikh community more visible and saying we're not a threat. We are good for you. And I think. And talking about that's actually a key word, good for you. He did talk, even just briefly in that speech he made. He said it's all about serving. He said we politicians give so much of our lives, our families, etc. to serving, seva, it's selfless service, which is so embedded, of course, in the Sikh philosophy. And what really strikes me, James, when I see people like him, why haven't we got more politicians from the Sikh community? We should have, because I'll tell you what, James, I would much rather be ruled over by a Sikh politician than most Western politicians. And I sincerely mean that, because I know that most politicians in our parliaments, whether it's in Canada or here in the UK or the Senate in the US, most of them are career politicians. They're in it for themselves. They're not in it for the interests of the community. They're not doing it for selfless service. They are driven by power, money, greed. And I'm sorry, but that is a fact of life. Prove me wrong for the majority, because I certainly know most of our politicians here in the UK are driven by those fundamental drivers. But I know when I see a Sikh politician, they are driven by their philosophy, which generally is good for humanity. So, and I sincerely mean that, I would much rather be ruled over by people like him than many of the politicians that we have. And I think he is a definite plus point, a positive contributor to Canada's political landscape, James.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you to the Heritage Society and everybody for welcoming me yesterday. I really enjoyed it. And a little shout out here to Calgary Sweets and Restaurant in Surrey, British Columbia, for providing the buffet yesterday. That was wonderful.
That sounds delightful, James. Shame I couldn't join you on that one.
It was a wonderful day, Angus. So, yeah, we'll better move on. We're running low on time already.
Indeed. Let's move on to my first story. And yes, last week, towards the end of last week, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, known as USCIRF, they released their annual report. They do this obviously on an annual basis, where they look at all the nations around the world and they report on religious freedoms within those nations. Now, I'll be talking to Dr. Sandhu later this week to get his opinion on this report. But this report was released, as I say, at the end of last week, and it went into great depths about India particularly, and about how India has been really just imposing its, as we often report on almost daily basis, how it's been imposing its strong-arm tactics against its minority communities, particularly the Sikh community. And as a result of this, for the 6th year in a row, the Department of State has asked the US government to designate, I can't get that word out, to designate India as a country of particular concern, CPC as it's known, because of its persecution of religious freedoms within India. So I'm just going to quickly, it's a massive report. It's about 96 pages. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through it in great detail. But what I wanted to do is just pick out some of the key elements that were raised in this report, just to what it's identified going on in India, and then to get the Sikh perspective on this, to get somebody from the Sikh community's perspective on this. As I say, I'll be talking to Dr. Sandhu. Keep an eye out for that podcast to get the Sikh community's reaction to this report. But I'll give you some of the highlights. So what it did, it gave a detailed analysis of global religious freedom conditions across last year, and highlighting countries where the violations of religious freedom was particularly severe. Unsurprisingly, India featured highly on this. So, some of the key elements. Transnational repression and international incidents featured largely, unsurprisingly. The Indian government, it said, allegedly engaged in TNR, transnational repression, targeting Sikh activists abroad. Of course, notably the assassination of Sikh separatists in the US and Canada. Govt Singh Panoon, who fortunately survived his, Hardeep Singh Nijjar unfortunately didn't. Vikash Yadav gets a mention, an Indian government employee, and India's intelligence agency RAW were directly implicated in assassination plots against Sikh activists in the US. Key findings on religious freedom violations, including, it did actually, and this is key, this is a very interesting message that came out, India's religious freedom conditions significantly deteriorated in 2024. And that's important because it's saying it's not just staying the same, it's not improving, it's actually getting worse. There is a trend line that is appearing. It's actually deteriorating. India is getting worse. So, and when we talk about, James, talk about stories like last week when we said the BJP, Narendra Modi's government, are dishing out these boxes, these aid boxes to the Muslim community, that flies in the face of the findings of this report that said conditions are significantly deteriorating for the minorities, and of course particularly for the Sikh community in India. It was marked by increased attacks and discrimination against the minorities, notably Muslims and Christians. And of course, we do know what's going on in Manipur against the Christians there. Before the June elections, BJP officials, including Modi himself, used hateful rhetoric and disinformation against religious minorities to rally political support. This resulted in vigilante violence, arbitrary killings, destruction of religious minorities' property and places of worship. Of course, I did say, and I have been saying regularly, that last election was fought primarily on religious grounds, deliberately discriminating against the minorities, whether Muslims or Sikhs or Christians. And this is despite the fact that India is supposed to be a secular society. Yet Modi and the BJP fought it primarily on religious grounds, knowing the majority of the Indian demographic are, of course, Hindus. Authorities utilise laws like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, yes, that awful, dreadful act that's used and abused regularly, and the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the FCRA, to target civil society, journalists and minority groups reporting on religious issues. So again, this is the government abusing pieces of legislation to deliberately target journalists and anybody, campaigners, activists, who are trying to hold the government to account. Again, that is a key piece of evidence that proves that democracy is failing in India. So that's been brought out by the this US Commission. New criminal codes adopted could be leveraged against religious minorities accused of threatening national unity. There again, the Khalistan movement threatening national unity. So these criminal codes are being used to leverage against campaigners or activists fighting for secession or Khalistan or anything like that. Even Tamil Nadu or Manipur, any of these independence movements, if you dare stand up and say we want to break away because you are persecuting us, that the government is leveraging these pieces of legislation against them and imprisoning them, basically. Specific incidents and trends that were brought up. Anti-conversion laws were strengthened or introduced across several states, notably Uttar Pradesh and Assam, which broadened punitive measures, including life imprisonment for forced conversions and increased regulation of interfaith marriages. The Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA, combined with the National Register of Citizens, heightened fears among Muslims regarding citizenship status, particularly in Assam, where 28 Muslims were declared non-citizens. And again, we reported on that in the past. At the beginning of the year, Modi inaugurated the Ram Temple at Ayodhya. Yeah, we've talked a lot about this. It was built over that demolished masjid, the Babri Masjid, leading to violent outbreaks in multiple states. And this is one of many incidents where old mosques have been demolished and then Hindu temples built on top of the ruins. And of course, Ayodhya caused a storm of protests, etc. It's been a terrible story, that one. Communal violence related to cow protection intensified, with lethal attacks targeting both Muslims falsely accused of beef consumption and, in a notable case, a Hindu mistakenly identified as a Muslim. And violent incidents included attacks against Christian communities, such as the assault on 18 Christian families in Chhattisgarh, and demands for Christians to renounce their faith or leave villages. And of course, and then we talked about Manipur. There's been serious conflicts occurring in Manipur between the Kukis, the Christian Kukis, and the Hindu Maitais, affecting religious congregation freedoms. And of course, there have been something like 150 or more Christian churches that have been burnt down across Manipur. So again, that massive violence against the Christian Kuki communities in Manipur. Now, US policy actions and recommendations, a big heading here. This is all about the recommendations. So the Commission recommended that the US government designate India as a country of particular concern, CPC, due to its systematic religious freedom violations. It suggested imposing sanctions against individuals like Vikas Yadav and entities, organisations like RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, involved in severe religious freedom violations. And note here, RAW is a state organisation. It is part of the state. It is saying that we need to sanction parts of the Indian state because they have been targeting, they've been used and abused by the government to target minorities. Again, this is enormous. This is actually the US government saying, look, parts of the Indian government have been deliberately used to target some of your minorities. In other words, this isn't just a group of people, this is the Indian state itself that's abusing the minorities. It encouraged the US Embassy to publicly prioritise religious freedom and recommend Congress enact the Transnational Repression Reporting Act of 2024, and again we've reported a lot on that, to track India's overseas repression, and it recommended a review of US arms sales, specifically these MQ-9B drones, to assess if they exacerbate religious freedom violations. So again, we've talked a lot about how the US is trying to build bridges with India, and one of those bridges includes arms sales and boosting the Indian military. And this, of course, does bring up this complex dynamic of US-India relations because, of course, on one side, we've got this US Commission saying, look, India is desperately breaching human rights on the one hand, but we still, unfortunately, and then the US government has got this other problem saying that we need to bring India on side because we need them as an ally against China. So again, you've got this massive conflict in the US government, this balance between human rights or the geopolitical dynamics. And then, of course, it does address US-India diplomatic relations. Despite human rights concerns, the US maintained strong diplomatic relations with India through events such as the Quad Summit and the US-India two-on-two dialogues, which focus primarily on technology, security and health, rather than human rights issues. So this report is actually saying, look, yes, you're building these diplomatic relations, but you are forgetting the human rights issues. You cannot do this. We must hold our own government to account. Again, this is a democracy in action. This is how it works. Everything has the ability, any organisation or individual has the right to safely hold the government to account without fear. And that is what this commission is doing, saying, look, you've been building these diplomatic relations, but you're ignoring human rights issues. You cannot do this. So well done to the commission. Prisoner and victim data, USCIRF, documented India as having 55 cases involving imprisoned or detained individuals due to religious freedom issues, including instances of medical neglect. So overall, this annual report paints a pretty grave picture of India's current trajectory regarding religious freedoms. And when I say the word trajectory, the trend line, as I said at the beginning, is deteriorating. So the trajectory is it's getting worse. We should be concerned about this. So this commission said to the US government, you've got to take notice of this. It is deteriorating. It's getting worse. It highlighted significant concerns about the government's treatment of minorities, its use of repressive laws, and of course its transnational repression practices. And the report finally calls for targeted US policy responses to address and mitigate these concerns. So James, I would say it's a pretty damning report. The Indian government might not care, but it really should, because the US government and the Trump administration are going to receive this report. They're going to read this report and they're going to say, hang on a second, on the one hand, we're building all these bridges, but on the other, our own commission has said for the 6th year in a row, we should be sanctioning India because they are abusing their minorities dreadfully, and it's getting worse, James.
Absolutely. And, as sad as it is, I really don't think that the U.S.'s priority right now is dealing with the human rights issues that face India, and especially at the hands of their own government. I think they are looking more towards securing the trade agreements, and the bottom line is the dollar. And the other concern that I have is the international opinions towards the media, and will that give India more of a sense of entitlement and empowerment to really continue to breach these human rights issues when it comes to their people and their minority communities, Angus.
Yeah, and I think that, James, you're absolutely right. That is a key point here, is that every year that the US government ignores the USCIRF report to say you've got to start imposing sanctions or at least start taking efforts to stop this or at least bring it up, then India gets away with it. India knows that every year the US government ignores these reports, it basically can carry on. And not just carry on, and this maybe explains why the trajectory is getting worse, it is deteriorating, is because they know, well, the US government keeps getting advised about it, but they're not doing anything about it, so we can get away with it. We can carry on doing it. In fact, we can make it worse because nobody seems to care about it. And that, I think, James, you're absolutely right, that's the key point here. The US government has got to do something about this. Not just mention it behind the scenes in a one-on-one meeting. They've got to actually take concrete action against it. They've got to punish punitive measures, as it said. It's got to punish India, and it's got to send the message to India clearly, unambiguously, you cannot do this. You cannot get away with this. It is not right if you want to join the top table, if you want to be recognised as a democratic nation, James.
Absolutely, and it also gives more power to the international community to recognize Khalistan as a sovereign nation when it happens, because of the record that will come out against the Sikhs as well as all the other minorities within India. So it only helps the Khalistan movement at the end of the day, I think, Angus.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I think, ironically, I think you're absolutely right there. And I've said this myself many times in the past, is the more that India persecutes and abuses the Sikh community, the more ammunition it's giving to the Khalistan movement, not just promoting support, but of course the legal evidence. And it's all about the legal evidence here. It's just gifting legal evidence to the Khalistan movement. So yeah, it's a win-win, as they say. So, right, James, let's move on to my second story. And this is a nice story. And it's just a quick, nice story. Here in the UK, in the southeast of England, in the county of Kent, we have a city called Gravesend. Is it a city or a large town? Whatever. Anyway, it's a large conurbation, whatever you want to call it. The Gravesend, it has a very, very large Gurdwara, the Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Gravesend. They have a football team. It's called Guru Nanak Football Club. And I'm delighted to say that the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, Corporation, our state broadcaster, picked up on this story. They just celebrated their 60th anniversary of the establishment of this football club. And I'll play you just a brief excerpt from this report from the BBC. This was them interviewing the guy, the main coach of Guru Nanak FC. Have a look at this.
Had a lot of racism when we first started in the 80s and 90s. But we fought against it, and those same people now are friends, so we've sort of made them change their minds about us.
The Sikh temple here is the largest in Europe and one of the largest outside India. Time! The religious connection is clear and is what the club was founded on. But today's Guru Nanak FC is a multicultural, multi-ethnic club embracing the wider North Kent community.
This club, it symbolises courage, inclusivity and diversity. Everyone's welcome to play. Anyone can come for a training session, sign up to play for a team, play in the league, play for tournaments, and altogether it's just a good vibe and a good atmosphere week in, week out.
The club's open to anyone and everyone, so for here anyone can come and play, and you can see the facilities here, what they offer, and it's fantastic for anyone to get out of their house, play some football for fun.
It gets people together. You've got 11 people and you're on the same side. It doesn't matter what colour you are. You have to fight for each other if you want to win, so that's where you get love. People think there's hate out there. It's not all hate, there's a lot of love out there.
Guru Nanak FC is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, and what a celebration it will be of multiculturalism, inclusion and community.
Now, there are two really, really important messages came out of that story for me. It's just a simple local snapshot of just a little community football club. But two messages came for me out of that. Firstly, at the beginning of that interview, the coach said, look, when they first established the club, it was, originally it was met with a lot of discrimination. But as he said, over the time, those people who discriminated, who were racist against the club, became friends. This is all about, and again, exactly what I was talking about earlier earlier in the show, breaking these barriers down is people who feel threatened to start with. They're racist because they feel threatened. But as soon as they get to know these people, suddenly they think, actually, they're not a threat. They're actually quite decent people. So that is exactly what happened with the football club. It met the local discrimination, this natural fear, this human nature fear of racism. And then once they got to know the people in the football club, the barriers broke down. They actually became friends. Again, it's all about not just the integration and the inclusion. It's about breaking those barriers. It's all about education, James. That's the key word we always talk about. And the other one is, and this again, a very powerful message. One of the key themes through that whole story there was all about inclusion. This isn't a football club just for Sikhs. It's for anybody. Anybody can turn up. And this is what Khalistan and all. When we see criticism of Khalistan, quite often saying, "Oh, it's all just for Sikhs. It's just the Sikh empire all over again, that's just purely for Sikhs." No, it's not. This is a tiny macrocosmic example of what Khalistan would be. It is open to everybody. It is inclusive. It doesn't matter what your colour is, what your religion is, what your background is, what anything. It doesn't matter. Everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome in our Sikh football club, in our Punjabi football club. That is exactly what Khalistan will be. Everybody will be welcome because this is the tenets of our faith, is that we treat everybody as equal. Everybody is welcome, James. That's the powerful message here.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, what bigger event is there than football for, a lot of people around the globe, especially on that side of the pond, to bring community together, not just on the field, but also as spectators to cheer on their teams. I mean, sport is a very powerful medium to bring people together and to celebrate and have fun. For the most part, you get the few hooligans there, here and there, but, for most of it, it's a great experience.
Indeed, absolutely, and good luck to Guru Nanak FC. Right, Jazz, let's move on to our comments column to kick the week off. Loads of comments. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments that are pouring in. Right, we'll start off with one of our regulars, Hardal Singh. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Thanks for this one. Can you tell us about the Boer War, where Sikh soldiers fought with bayonet to bayonet with African soldiers, and Sikhs won the war? Thanks, sorry if I'm wrong. But actually, no, you're not wrong. And this has prompted me, and I haven't had time to do a lot of research into this, but yes, the Boer War, which happened in South Africa just around the turn of the 20th century. So I think it was, off memory, 1899 to 1902, I think, were the actual years. Yes, this was when the Dutch, the Boers, who'd also colonised southern Africa, came up against the British Empire. And of course, part of the British Empire, the Sikhs were serving within the British Army at that time. And yes, indeed, the British Army fought this war against the Boers, the settled Dutch people from the Netherlands, Holland. And there was a series, quite a nasty war actually. It was a terrible war. Some terrible things went on both sides. The British were just as guilty as the Boers for perpetrating some pretty awful things. But the Sikhs were involved. A lot of Indian soldiers, actually, not just Sikhs, but a lot of Indian soldiers were involved. What's very hard to find is specific Sikh information, how the Sikhs were involved, but we do know the Indians, a large number of Indian soldiers were involved as part of the British Army, but we do know that there were some Sikh soldiers. Rudyard Kipling, a famous author, British author at the time, wrote some stories about particularly the Indian contingent of the British Army. There is reference to some Sikh soldiers and some heroic deeds. James, I think we'll have to do a bit of digging on this, but thank you for bringing this up. But I think the default situation is wherever the British Army were involved during the days of the British Army post 1849, you can guarantee that the Sikh soldiers were involved there because, of course, they recognise how heroic and courageous the Sikh soldiers were. So wherever the British Army needed some pretty stoic, solid soldiers, they knew that the Sikh regiments were the regiments to stick in there first of all, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I actually am part of a group. There's a Sikh group on Facebook from Africa and different regions. So yeah, I'll have to reach out and see if anybody can share some information as well while I'm doing the research on that.
Right, next comment. This is a really serious story, this. 5AAB reports of this story that hit the mainstream press here in the UK. In West London, a school has warned every student with expulsions if they bring any item relating to Easter. A Christian country where a Christian cannot practice his or her religious festival, yet Hindus, Muslims are free to celebrate Diwali or Eid, Ramadan, etc. Wow, yeah. And then Devinder Juti responds, look, that's really sad. My school was Church of England school. As a Sikh, I took part in the school play at Christmas. It didn't do me any harm. If Christian festivals are not allowed to be celebrated, what else matters more in a Christian country? We celebrated Easter and everything Christian. Then SSKK says, look, I'm a Sikh, and when a Sikh, as we say here in the UK, I'm a Sikh, and when I was at school in the morning assembly, I loved singing Christian hymns, praising all creatures great and small, etc. Yeah, I used to sing those as a young child at school as well, and many more hymns. I treasure them days, even now in my 60s. Now, James, this is a really, I'd say worrying situation here in the UK. Yeah, this story was terrible. There is a school in London that said you cannot celebrate Easter. It is offensive to our Muslim students, our Muslim school children. So you're not allowed to celebrate Christian things. And this is happening increasingly so across the UK, where Christian festivals, whether it's Easter or Christmas, are disappearing. You can't celebrate them publicly, or you can't say, for example, in certain areas, Happy Christmas. You've got to say Happy Holidays. This was also happening in the States, I noticed as well, because it might be offensive to the Muslim community. This is divisive. This is dangerous. And absolutely, and this is so typical of the Sikh community, say, look, no, you must celebrate your Christian festivals. You must celebrate Ramadan, because that is your religious festivals. You must do this. And I, as a Sikh, say that I must help you celebrate your festivals, because that is important to you. And this is all about the Sikh philosophy. Yes, for some bizarre reason, we have the liberal left in the UK who are doing so much damage to community interconnectedness, these relations between communities. Because what does this do? This gives ammunition to the right wing and the extremists to say, right, that's it, we're turning anti-Muslim, we're turning anti-Hindu, we're turning anti-Sikh, because they are stopping us celebrating our festivals. No, it's not these other communities that are doing it, it's these idiotic, primarily white, liberal, lefty idiots who are creating this division. So even people within the communities, even the Islamic communities, say, no, that's not right. If you're a Christian, celebrate your Christianity. And Sikhs likewise are saying this. But what it's doing is these people, and I think these are the true fascists, James, these white, left, liberal idiots, these fascists, are creating these divisions between the communities deliberately. And it's stories like this that absolutely highlight this agenda that's going on, James. It's very dangerous.
Absolutely, Angus. And a lot of times I know that I see the exaggerated reports in the mainstream media or online especially, where it's not really a story. They are creating it. And as you said, they're doing it to create divisiveness. And a lot of times, even when there's schools that have come up that have done stupid things like this, and, it turns out that it's an administrator that just really is creating an issue where there is not one, and thinking that they're so woke and so on top of, sensitivity, that they turn around, they take it so far and make their own unilateral decisions that impact all communities, but divide and really instill more anger and frustration where it really doesn't even exist. They are perpetrating that.
And it's to me, I've not delved deep into the legalities of this story, but I have no doubt that it would be actually illegal to prevent people celebrating a religious festival in the school. And the fact that it is a state school, so it's run by the government, in itself, I think, flies in the face of our fundamental democratic rights of freedom of expression and rights to practice our religion. So I think that I have no doubt if there are any lawyers amongst the parents that they will be taking legal action against that. But yeah, ultimately the real story here is it is this agenda to divide the communities, driven by this small number of people who've got this agenda right across the Western world, and it's linked to this woke stuff as well. It's very, very dangerous. We need to stamp down on it. Right, next set. Devinder Jutti kicks us off with no harm in displaying the Ten Commandments. Now, this is another story which we talked about. This was this school this is in the US now. This is jumping over to the United States, and this is in Texas, where ironically this turns the story on its head. This is the Christian community in Texas who are saying that you must display the Ten Commandments in your schools. But of course, all the other folks said, "Hang on, no. We need to be secular here. Every religion has got to be treated as equal." So Devinder Jutti's comment is saying there's no harm in displaying the Ten Commandments in Christian or any of the schools. They only teach good conduct. And yes, absolutely, you are right in that comment to say that the Ten Commandments are good. They are setting out a code of moral principles, how you should live your life according to Christian values. But of course, those same principles are reflected across most other religions as well. But that's not the argument. The argument is in this story is it's not about that the Ten Commandments are wrong. It's just that they are Christian in nature, and by putting that in the school, you're imposing Christianity on the school children to the exclusion of the other religions, James. So I think that's really the story here. It's not about the fact that the Ten Commandments are bad. Of course they're good. There's nothing wrong with the Ten Commandments. It's just the fact that you are imposing them unequally in the school, where in fact really if you put the Ten Commandments up, you then got to put or bits of the Quran or bits of Hinduism and a bit let's say some Gabani from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, etc., etc. So that's really the story, James.
Absolutely. And I mean, at one point he says in Christian, yeah, of course they can put the Ten Commandments up till the cows come home, because of the fact that is a Christian school. It's a private school. They can do whatever they want that way. But when it comes to public schools, first of all, if it worked for the Ten Commandments to actually instill and make people practice them, then of course, the legislators and the politicians who are forcing them into the schools would actually be better prepared morally and legally to be leaders. But again, they couldn't find the Ten Commandments if they hit them on the head. So it's a matter of separation of church and state, making everyone feel welcome. So I don't believe that it has a place in public schools. Private schools, hey, that's a different story altogether. So
exactly, yeah, spot on. And then Devinder finishes the comment off with the Indian government can't handle the peaceful stance of the Sikhs. They tried everything to disrupt the peaceful movement and they failed. This absolutely is so right. It doesn't matter what the Indian government do, they just can't handle the fact that the Sikhs are winning the war through peaceful democratic means. There's no militancy or terrorism involved. They're just winning this war just by simple process of winning the argument peacefully and democratically, and the Indian government are trying desperate measures. They just can't do anything to stop it. So the next topic that came up, we talked a lot about this, and this was the New Zealand Prime Minister who was interviewed on First Post, and he stood up absolutely magnificently for the rule of law, the right of democratic freedom of speech, particularly over the Khalistan movement. And Satbat Chan Singh says, I wish the Prime Minister would have told her that Sikhs have a different religion from the land of Punjab, they have different language and culture, and don't forget the fact that Sikhs ruled a huge territory around the Punjab. They were the ruling majority of Muslims and Hindu communities, of course, back in the day of the empire. So don't try and preach to anybody about how we should be suppressing and burying the Khalistan movement and the Sikh empire and supporters of a new Sikh empire, because it's not that long ago that they actually they ruled over you. They were a much more powerful community than you were at the time. So as we say in English, James, stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
Exactly. And come on now, the US is looking at expansionism with Greenland and other things, and yet the same people that support that are the ones that are arguing about Khalistan. So come on, you can't have it both ways. Either you recognize that change is inevitable and change is to be respected, or you don't. You can't have it both ways.
Indeed, and TC followed up with pretty much the same point, saying, look, much respect for gracefully educating that disgraceful excuse for a journalist. Yeah, I think we could have been even stronger with the language over that, but not be principled. And yeah, it was all about explaining to her the principles of democracy, freedom of speech, and the country's sovereignty. So much respect, as you say, to New Zealand. And as I said at the time, well done to the New Zealand community, the Sikh community there, because again, he's supported you because of course the work, the activism that you've done to raise the profile of the community. And Raipan Gill also talks about it. Excellent evaluation and analysis of news, especially Palki's desperation to get answers she wanted and your verdict. Well, yeah, it's not hard to see, and I thank TC and others who pointed us in the direction of that hilarious interview, because it really was a prime example of the Govt media coming up against the brick wall of Western democracy. In other words, there's no compromise here. You're either democratic or you're not. There's no in between, and that's unfortunately what India is finding. But James, I love the way, this is Raipan Gill, loves the way that you make us laugh with your sense of humour, apart from your vast knowledge of politics. There you go, James, there's a compliment for you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And, we just go through and try to have some fun with this show. Sometimes we cover dark subjects, so I think it's important to just mix in a bit of levity there where we can, Angus.
Great stuff indeed. And Parvinder follows up with Mr. James Cousineau, Mr. Angus Scott. Both are doing a wonderful job. Well, thank you so much. We do appreciate that. You guys will get the divine blessings of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji for your generous contribution in the history of Sikhs to get a sovereign state. Well, thank you. And the key word there I wanted to pick out on this comment was history of Sikhs. We will only form a teeny tiny part, but of course, we all want to leave a legacy in our lives. What a legacy if and when we get Khalistan established, and it will happen in hopefully God willing in our own lifetimes. Khalistan will happen. If James and I have played any small part in creating that, that is a legacy that makes a life worth living. That is when we pass on to our next whatever incarnation, at least if we're able to, we can look back and say, yes, we left our tiny mark. Our little contribution, James, is the establishment of Khalistan, but really the tribute goes to the real campaigners, the real activists, the high profile, the people who've been campaigning for a lifetime. And there are many of you out there who've done this. You are the ones who really will leave your mark on history once Khalistan is established, James. All we can do is leave our teeny tiny mark somewhere at the bottom, hopefully.
Absolutely, and there are so many that work behind the scenes tirelessly to try and make Khalistan a reality. So, what we do is such a small little drop in that bucket that the real honor goes to those who are working behind the scenes without the appreciation and the thanks. So for those, thank you.
Indeed, and the final comment of the day goes to Mankind Success, who follows up actually the same theme. Awesome viewpoint analysis of news, thank you so much. Awesome comments, thank you for all of your comments. Superb journalism, good heavens. But again, making history, this is what it's all about, James. This is what we're here for, to support the establishment of Khalistan. That indeed, how often is a new country established? It happens, I don't know, once every century or once every half a century, whatever. It's such a rare event in the world evolution. How amazing to be a part of making that sort of history in a lifetime, James.
That's right.
Indeed. So on that wonderful note, we must leave things for another day. Thanks so much for watching. As always, do keep your comments coming in. There's been loads coming in. Thanks so much for those. Loads of really interesting comments and loads of fascinating comments pointing to things that we need to research and talk about. So do keep those coming in. It always feeds us really interesting stuff to have a talk about and put into future shows. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satlogetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention directly. But in the meantime, that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.